Awesome. Okay, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Great to see everyone. I am sure more people will join in, but we can get started. Um, Great. So, as you all know, and many of you have attended these before, and I'm very happy to see familiar faces always. Um, Great. So today of course, I'm Vaishali. I'm a senior consultant at Atma, and Atma has been working since 2007. It's also coincidentally our 17 years anniversary today. So really glad to have shared this journey with all of you. Um, and so Atma has been supporting NGOs by building capacity and creating systems to solve organizational development issues, as you all know. And the Atma webinar series specifically started in 2017 as a platform where speakers share practical experiences and knowledge that can help us all in the sector. And we cover various areas like HR, finance, fundraising, communications. And you can find all of our past webinars for all the years on our YouTube channel. So do subscribe and do check it out. There's a lot of stuff there. And yeah, along with that, we'll also share this intermediary database that has been created by Atma, right? And they're all verified. Each entry is verified, and they're all people who are working in the sector actively to help us with various issues. People like Girish, right? So yeah. And so, if time permits, after the webinar, we can have a short demo of it as well. And of course, we have Girish with us today, who has led a wonderful initiative to bring insights on a topic where there is very little information. We all know that it's very hard to know how much are people paying in this sector, right? We have guesses, we have friends who tell us things, but there isn't any like comprehensive benchmarking done, right? So it's an amazing, I think the process of the report, the creation of the report itself has been an amazing community effort. So I'll give a quick intro of our speaker today and then we can start right away. So Girish is a social impact professional working in the last decade in different roles across McKinsey and Company, education NGO people, and Dalberg advisors. He is the curator of Raahi Impact Journeys, which is a social sector community and video podcast, bridging social development issues and management perspectives. Do check it out. We'll share the link. He is a graduate of IIT Madras and IIM Ahmedabad and holds recognitions as a One Young World Ambassador, St. Gallen's Leader of Tomorrow, Gates Foundation Goalkeeper, and Aditya Birla Scholar. So yeah, there we have our amazing speaker. And before I hand it over to you, just a note. Um, we'll try our best to keep it on English and Hindi, but more or less it'll be in English because uh, um, a lot of our participants are don't speak Hindi. So हम कोशिश करेंगे कि थोड़ा सा हिंदी और इंग्लिश का मिक्स रहे, लेकिन ज्यादातर इंग्लिश में रहेगा. अगर आपको किसी भी चीज का किसी भी पॉइंट का हिंदी ट्रांसलेशन की जरूरत है तो आप चैट बॉक्स में पूछ सकते हैं. मैं या आत्मा की टीम से जो भी हैं हम आपकी मदद कर सकते हैं. एंड ऑफ कोर्स गिरीश के लिए कोई भी सवाल हो आप हिंदी या मराठी में पूछ सकते हैं, मतलब हम ट्रांसलेट करके बता सकते हैं, नॉट गिरीश. बट yes, that's what. And whenever you have questions, we'll request you to add it in the chat box. We have space for Q&A, but it helps us keep the flow of the webinar. So yes, and with that, over to you, Girish.
थैंक्स वैशाली. हेलो एवरीवन. मुझे पता नहीं था कि हिंदी तो आती है, मगर मुझे पता नहीं था कि आई आल्सो हैड टू लर्न मराठी बिफोर आई केम हियर. कैन आई गेट अ क्विक शो ऑफ थम्स? हाउ मेनी ऑफ यू आर comfortable with both languages, comfortable with English and Hindi mota moti? Thanks Mahalakshmi, Rohit, Sheetal, Soumya. Okay, Swapna's got a lot of thumbs there. Thanks Manan. All right. How many are, and thanks Nadeem Ravistan for the chat. और कोई है जिनको बिल्कुल इंग्लिश आती ही नहीं है या उस पर कंफर्ट नहीं, अगर बात करेंगे तो प्लीज हिंदी में बात करने वाले किसी का अभ्यर्थन है? so that I can just manage दोनों तरफ से. ठीक है. चलिए, तो let's get going. Nia's only English. Noted. All right, super. I think very good to have a sense of all of you, and thank you for engaging. So the story begins here. Let me just, Vaishali gave a nice introduction, but I find it helpful to just contextualize a little bit of what this effort is by starting with a little bit of my journey. So I began my career at McKinsey and Company. I spent 4.5 years there as a management consultant. I mean, I did the whole BTech MBA करके I went on to the corporate consulting world. जिसके बाद I moved to the education sector, and many of you who I know from my 4 years at Peepul, the education nonprofit. So we work with the government in Delhi and Madhya Pradesh, and or at a national level to strengthen policy and improve governance goals. So that was 4 years of my life. And after that, I went on a career break. Jo chala for a year, I was on a career break. And during that time, I think part of the break was to answer this question, which all of us will have gone through as we work in the sector, which is what is social impact? Right? What is worth doing? What is worth spending time towards? And as I was doing this, I somehow came across building something that I've called Raahi Impact, which is a set of different experiments that I was running on strengthening the social sector. One of these experiments was the community-driven benchmarking, which is what I'll be sharing with all of you. And a few months ago, about 5 or 6 months ago, I also, while continuing to work on Raahi, have joined Dalberg Advisors, which is a social sector consultancy that some of you may know as a senior project manager. So what was the idea of Raahi? I think it began with setting up a YouTube channel, which was my way of putting a camera in front of people and asking them कि अच्छा आप करते क्या हो? What do you do and what does social impact mean to you? And that slowly has evolved. I've tried to do explainers on what is climate change. And whenever I've done something like this compensation benchmarking, as they say, people don't read anymore. So I also put a short 20-minute overview of the report that people can access over there and things like that. So now it's become a landing point for anything that will be useful, because I couldn't find any meaningful channel or podcast which talks about social impact, leadership, and what makes a life worth living. So, and that has been my attempt at trying to build that for myself and for others. So, what do we want to cover today? What we hope to achieve is, one, to orient you to how benchmarking can work. What are the benefits of benchmarking? What are the limitations of benchmarking? Second, share with you a overview of a compensation and benefits benchmarks that was done in the social sector. And I also want to spend 5-10 minutes with you just to reflect on what these findings mean for the sector. Now, how will we do that? Specifically, we will talk about the report. What is this report that you've all joined to hear about? What does the report actually talk about? And I'll try to help you navigate that report. It's a public report. Many of you may have also gone through it. But what I want to do in the limited time we have is help you contextualize. And finally, also discuss what does this mean? What is the implication of this? Right? And the report is, the front page is what you see on the bottom left. This is a report that was published sometime in March 2024. So, like I shared, the report and an overview of the report is available that you can directly access on the Raahi Impact Journeys channel. And there is also, well, so this is a way for us to engage more deeply on it. So you may not actually require that. So very quickly, I would love for us to shape this session together. So if you have any questions, you can please put it on chat. I will keep an eye on the chat, and I may also periodically take pauses. I have planned for pauses to ensure that we reflect on whatever your questions are. And second, let's make sure we talk as well. There will be actual pauses for discussion, and there is a Q&A at the end. And in case you want to speak, something is burning, please feel free to also raise your hand. So very quickly getting into what is this report. So all of this began, I think now 2 years ago. In 2022, there is a HR for NGOs WhatsApp group that some of you I know are part of. And I was at that point working for Peepul. And we were looking for consulting firms to do benchmarking, like many of you were. And I asked the question saying, listen, does anybody know if there's a good benchmark available? If it's not there, should we just make one? Everyone who is relevant is here in the group. So why don't we just do this? That created momentum, and we ended up creating a benchmarking report in 2022. 1 year later, people came back and said, hey, listen, I was on a break at that time. Listen, can we do this again? And so we ended up doing it a year later. All that was done is that I put a survey draft together, put down the questions, checked with everyone whether this was the right questions to have, and everyone helped with the outreach and sending it outwards. And the idea was to say that there are three things that make this unique. First is it is community driven. The survey was not designed by some consulting firm on the side. It was shaped with inputs from the people who wanted to use it. Second, everyone gave their data. 100 organizations from across India have given their data, trusting one person to put that data together and share back insights in a way that keeps their private information private and shares useful insights. So everyone gains. Second, my whole thing was, at that point, there was a report that was supposed to come, but everyone had been saying it's coming for like 6 months at that time. And so the idea was that you give data on day one, and by day 20 or day 60 maximum, you will have the report back in your hand that you can use. So there was a preliminary report, and then there was a final report that was sent out. And third was, I remember, I think this was Ashish from Shiksharth who said that, listen, the weather in Delhi and Bombay usually determine the climate of India. We shouldn't make it that way. It should be inclusive. It should be that if there is a urban rural difference, it should be made highlighted. So a lot of that report was also divided up so that you can see different cuts which can help you identify for your organization, not just some organization that looks like you. And then at the end of this, the report was sent to all the 100 participants. And many of them were like, listen, this looks very useful. Can we please create a public version of this? And then some others were like, but if we make it public, then people will not participate next time. And I was like, there is a next time that I did not know. That's great. We'll do it again. But also, how do we think about this? Wrote to 100 organizations and everyone gave their permission to say, feel free to create a limited version of the report that is public. So the report that is available to you that Vaishali has put on chat has all the important information that you will need. It just doesn't have certain additional cuts. For example, the urban rural sort of cut that I had done, that I mentioned, it isn't there because we wanted some additional value for participants for participating. And that's the way that it has been architected. So after that, there have been a range of surveys that have also been conducted. I will talk about one of them later. If you or your organization would like to participate in such things, please do write into the Raahi email ID because these come up organically as requests from people. So this is not something that I'm doing as a full-time job, and it is not something that is my primary source of income. So I am able to do it in a way that, the objective here is to really add value to the sector and to all of you. How was this done? First, there was an outreach after the design where people sent out the links on LinkedIn. Everyone filled a survey. The survey was with generic titles. It was like, how do you compare a 50 people org and a 2,000 people org? How do you compare someone who's working only in a city versus something like, say, Teach for India, where I can see someone is from, where you've got a whole set of volunteers. So the attempt was to create a simplified version which at least has most organizations will have like CEO, CO, senior manager, junior manager, senior associate, junior associate, field associate. Roughly every organization, Mota Moti, has this sort of a structure. So with that in mind, we are trying to ask people questions and they answer. Why am I highlighting this? Because this is also not to be taken as perfect. The idea was a quick sense, a dipstick benchmark. Very quickly, in a few weeks, you get an answer. That's the idea. And you have a decent answer, it's not going to be the best answer. And with this information, I put some analysis together and we shared it back. Now, this analysis is some of what I will help you understand easily in this conversation. So the participant report, the information was collected in November. The analysis was done over November, December, and the report was shared to the participants in December. And then it took me 1, 2 months to get permission because I hadn't gotten it upfront. And so the report was shared in March. This is all the setup. And before I even get into things, it's important that you know that this is not the only report that is available out there. At the point that I had done this, there are two other reports that I'm aware of. One, there is ISDM, CSIP, and Conferry, Ashoka and Conferry. Many of you would have seen this. They put a report on talent management. And they also try to create a dashboard out of it so that you can access the information. There is also GuideStar's Million Missions report about the nonprofit sector, which also has certain useful aspects. There are differences across the three reports. My objective when I was creating this report was keeping it as simple and as accessible as possible because it's a very detailed and nuanced analysis that's happened in the other reports. My objective was I want to make decisions and I want to help you make decisions. That's the main thing. And you will find why I say that, which is why it's not perfect. It has tried to keep it simple, but give a directional idea. Now the question comes, this is what the report is. This is context for the report, but what does the report actually say? All good. Give me a quick thumb if we're okay so far. If there's any questions, let's just take it up front. A lot of your questions will, of course, be answered after this. Okay, thank you. So we're done with like Act 1 of the movie. Coming to the second part, here are just pages. Thank you. Lovely to see all these thumbs here. Very helpful. Thanks, Swati, Nilesh, Aishwarya. So this is the report. I've pulled some of the pages so that you can understand the structure of the report. The report, all of you have access to. It is in the chat, what Vaishali has sent, the last message on the chat. Feel free to go through it in your own time. What I want to do is one, how do you access it? The report itself is 80 pages, but out of those 80 pages, maybe only 5 will matter to your organization and your context right now. Hence, important to talk to you about this. What does the report have? First, quickly context and overview, a little bit of what I told you. Second, overview of the participants. Who are the participants based on whom the benchmarking was done? Third, the benchmarks around salary, around compensation. Fourth, the benchmarks around benefits, about leaves, about PF gratuity insurance, wellness, bonus and increments, and other benefits. Remember, this was done in December 2023. So bonus and increments for the next year was also an important aspect because they were planning for the next year. And finally, there were closing thoughts. So I had set up for that, I put a pay as you wish. The report is in your hands. If you would like to, support such public goods voluntary efforts, feel free to pay as you wish. Acknowledgements for a range of people who helped set it up and links to the other benchmarking reports which are there. So very quickly, the first section, which was very important, is also what I want to communicate to you, saying this is not a perfect document. Use it to get an indicative idea. It is, generally it is 40 lakhs, not 4 lakhs. That sort of idea you get, but please don't use it for as an exact figure. Remember that the data is self-reported. Organization just filled a survey and shared it. So, of course, there is value in trusting, but also there might be some nuances that are missed, especially around, CEO salaries, for example. That's a tricky space, which may not always be fully captured. Or the support functions have had to take certain decisions around it. Second, of course, for organization leaders, just a reminder that what matters is your organization strategy. There is no perfect game plan. And for the employees, just a request that be thoughtful about how you use the report. It's very hard being an org leader. And especially when it comes to salaries, all of you in the room will know that it becomes a very sticky point. So how do you use the information here to have a constructive conversation and meaningful dialogue and not a standoff and a confrontation? Is the request that was there as the report begins. Now, this is the list of everyone, 80% of the organizations who have given their data based on which this report has been created. Now, there are a few others who preferred not to put their names out there, but this is a very representative sample. Why does this matter? You will get a sense of whether this relates to your situation or not. Second, there are a few different cuts of the participating organizations, cut by budget size. From 5 to 50 lakh, 50 lakh to 1 crore, 1 crore to 3 crores, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, all the way to there are 8 organizations that were in the 50 to 200 crore mark. That's what you see in the first screenshot. Second screenshot is there are the cut by which sectors these participants belong to. education, health are the large numbers. But of course, everyone marked multiple, so it was always hard for me to separate them very clearly. Third was around the age of the organization and the size of the organization. So most organizations who participated were less than 25 years old and had less than 125 employees. You can see from the dots which are there. This is the detail that was there, just giving you the overview of it. Now, coming to actually what was the analysis that was done in the compensation section. There were 4 types of analysis, and let me lay them out. The thing is, all the analyses are with the same data. They're just different cuts, and different cuts are useful for different people. So, first one is there is a table. What is the table? The table is just the information put out very clearly. Right? Those who enjoy reading tables and just finding the information can find it. The table has, as an example, for each of the budget sizes. Budget is obviously the most common way of comparing organizations, right? So when we look at the annual budget, this is the screenshot is from the page, which has the information for the 50 lakhs to 1 crore per annum budget organizations. It has how many people gave this information, which is the first row. What was the minimum information given? What was the maximum given? And what was the average given? For each of the different roles that we asked in the survey, that is leadership teams, CEO and CXO, the program teams, which is late tenured manager, early manager, tenured associate, learning associate, field associate, 5 of them, and then the support teams, finance, fundraising, M&E, and HR, which were the common teams that we looked at. If there is no data there, it usually means that they don't have those teams. So this is the core data. Now, many of us like graphs more than data, which is where now we shift to the graphical view. So this graphical view looks at, again, on the horizontal, it's the same information, but for all the different budget types. So for each budget type on the horizontal, the little circle below is the number of people who gave this information. The color is for the different roles. So for example, give me an example, what size organization should we look at and what role? If you could put it on chat, that will be helpful. Anyone? Should we look at 5 to 10 crore organization? Okay, fantastic. So Aishwarya is asking us, let's look at CEO salaries for 5 to 10 crore. So first I will look for 5 to 10 crore, which is this set of graphs. In that, I want the CEO salary, which is this color. So it is about 27.1 is the number that comes out as the salary that is there for a 5 CR organization. Right? Now, there is a trick to this. The average is not the full picture, but we will come to that in the next slide. But thank you, Aishwarya. That's helpful. Now, as one more example, what do we look at? Let's look at something that's not the CEO. Not all of us are CEOs in this room, so let's also look at other ones. One more example on the chat, someone. Managers for the 100 crore organization. Thanks, Sim. So I will look at the 50 to 200 crore. I know that there are 7 organizations that filled that information. I want to look for managers, but I don't know specifically for manager. There are 2 types of managers. There is the tenured manager who might have more, more years of experience, and the early tenured manager. I will see that, okay, a tenured manager, according to this, gets something like 17.7 lakhs per annum, and an early tenure manager gets about 9 lakhs per annum. So very, very important thing to note, one question that you're about to ask me is, how do you differentiate between tenured managers and early tenure managers? I don't. It is self-reported data. It is data that is, you generally have a sense. What often happens in organizations is there are some folks who fill the same information for both. Or said, I have only 3 managers in my organization, so I don't want to separate between them. And they roughly get the same salary. In which case, the same information was put in both places, or it was put in one place, right? So just saying that it is a subjective definition of who is a tenured manager and early tenure manager, because it changes by organization's hiring strategy. To what Soumya and Malati are asking, this is the next part. This page only has the leadership and program teams. There's another page which has got the graphs for the org support teams, which is, as you can see, there are 4 rows. finance, fundraising, M&E, and HR. And let's look at, Malati wanted fundraising. Let's say we want it for a 15 crore organization. Again, on the horizontal, I will look at, let me find the 15 crore, that will be in 5 to 10 crore. About 12 folks have given this information. I will look at fundraising, which is the second row. And I know that a fundraising manager gets something like 12 lakh per annum and a fundraising associate gets something like 5 lakh per annum. Rough, right? Now, coming to the last piece of the puzzle, the thing is that averages are never the full picture. If I had showed you this graph first, you would have run away scared, which is why we went through the averages first. Now let's look at the more complicated but interesting and very useful graph. So, Simran, to your question, does tenure mean time in the org or experienced person was hired? Tenured in terms of seniority, tenured in terms of year in role. Like, for example, if I were to hire somebody um, to a CXO -1 role, I might hire someone who's got 15 years of experience. But I might also hire someone who has 5 years of experience. But I might call the one with 15 years as a senior manager and the other one as a manager in the actual organization, right? Or officer and senior officer. There are different terms and it varies across organizations. But the idea is if you start from CEO, then you've got a set of directors typically, like who's not that one CEO, but is still part of the large leadership team. Then you'll have a managerial team who has people reporting to it who are the associates. And then you potentially have also separately or together people in the field. And usually the salary goes like this. So now let's quickly take a look at this one page. There's a separate page for CEO, CXO, separate page for senior manager, junior manager, separate page for senior associate, junior associate, field associate, and for the support functions. I am showing you as an example the page for the individual contributors, which is the associates. Like we discussed, we separated it into three types of associates. Brown, tenured associate, light blue, junior associate, early tenure associate, and deep blue or bright blue, field associate. That thick red line that you're seeing here is the average salary. Let's look at, we looked at some, let's look at the previous slide very quickly. Let's take the same information. Let's say in this previous slide, I'm looking at the senior associate salary is 5.3 lakhs per annum for a 5 to 10 crore organization, right? I'm going to quickly go to the deep dive. If I look at the 5 to 10, I can see the same 5.3 as the average for the brown. This is the average salary, it's the same number. The additional information you get is that someone gave the information of 10 lakhs per annum and someone else also has given the information of 3 lakhs per annum. So this 3 lakhs and 10 lakhs is what has averaged to 5 lakhs, right? We don't have enough of a sample size to do medians, which would have been ideal. So statistically, it is not a good idea to do it. So we just have max, min, and average. Medium and mode were also. So let me take a pause. This is the only complicated graph in the entire document. If we have any doubts, we can spend a minute here. But I will pause. If anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hand or unmute and share if you can unmute. All good? If all good, then of course, as always, I would love to see a thumb. Thanks, Ayuta. Thanks, Shahzade. Thank you. Yes, someone's unmuted. Pramila, please go ahead.
Yeah, actually, you said that. Am I audible?
Very much.
Yeah. So you said that 3 lakhs to 10 lakhs. The range is very vast because when we want to have a decision making based on these, as you said, average figures is nothing if you see. So how do we take a decisions? Because this report, we would like to use it to make a decisions. So
Yeah.
how do we take a decisions in the organization? As you said, maybe we can look for the size of the organization based on their budgets, like 1 crore, 2 crores. That is clear. But
Yeah.
if the range is somewhere 3 to 10 is very vast. So how do we
Yeah.
take a decisions? Actually, it's a tough.
It's a tough one. I think you answered the question also, but let me add a little bit. So one is, think of this as a source of input, right? Not as the guideline that can lead to the answer. If you spend a little bit of time with this, what I remember was useful for some organization was when they looked at it, they realized that in general, they are touching the average for most roles, but the maximum difference from that is happening for the, let's say, the senior associate role, right? And then you're also like, oh, you know what? Actually, I have a lot of people leaving around that time because they get a job in some other organization as a manager because they're almost there. If they spend 6 more months, they're ready for manager. But that is the point of attrition. And so we probably need to do something there. And that it use this as a document to surface conversations and as a way for you to kind of diagnose where you want to see shifts. This cannot be the only factor, but it can be a useful factor. Right? Someone else I remember, they had wanted to talk deeper about it. They had this significant issue of attrition, and for them, they had great benefits, but their salaries were very hard to match. And their strategy was that they still had. I mean, they were like, we just don't have the funds. That is our limiting factor, and so we just have to live with this reality. But what we can do is let's play on flexibility, let's play on the benefits that we have, etc. And so that sometimes becomes a reality, right? And I actually think for me there is also this one reflection that I also wanted to bring up later is, I mean, the salary differences are so vast, which for me is quite telling in the sector, and we'll talk about it a little bit. But for example, instead of hiring one more senior person, like there is an interesting, if I have a pot of 50 lakhs, or let's say I have a pot of 20 lakhs, do I want to hire one senior person or do I want to hire four junior folks? Depending on this, like if it's the same pot of money, depending on what my organization needs, I will think about it differently. But for me, having created this, I was able to at least have that thought saying that's the equivalence I'm playing. Roughly, this is how much it will cost. And where can I bring value becomes a question. Pramila, again, no direct answer, but I hope this is somewhat helpful. And thank you for being the first person to ask a question.
Because in the development sector, I always feel if the post graduation is there in another sector, there is a thing. Why do we development sector is a separate, right from the beginning? We ourselves devalue, because even I am in this sector from the 30 years. One of the government
Yeah,
officer, one of the foundations asked me, oh, why do you need this senior manager? Then we send the CV and the experience in your organization. How much you are paying, you pay that much. That person takes that
yeah.
salary. So these are all the challenges I am seeing from the past 30 years. So I just, yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, Pramila, two different things that I would say, right? One is internal, what we use for our decision making. Second is, I would also naturally suggest that when you need to convince stakeholders, I will use whatever information is meaningful and relevant for that. For example, one of the issues that does happen for one of the participants is executive compensation, right? Like you do need strong leaders and you do need folks to lead the organization. And their question was somebody who had worked in the sector 10 years ago. He was like, when I used to work in the sector, we didn't have such salaries. Why is it so high? Sort of thing. So then we leveraged another benchmarking. I think it was the ISDM one, if I remember correctly, to bring up the point. Say, like, listen, this is the compensation that is there today in the sector. This has been done, and as you can see, it has moved. It is not what you saw 10 years ago. So I think at two different levels. I think my part of the answer was saying internal reflection. For internal reflection, what will be useful? For external clarification and defending our territory, for that also sometimes these benchmarks become useful, right? But I'm with you. I don't think this should be seen separately in any way. Any other question? Else, I think
There are some in the chat, Girish.
Oh, thank you for that. I missed that then.
Bharati has asked, can you share salary was what percentage of overall funds? If you have an insight on that.
So that actually the CEO salary as a percentage of org budget was a data point that was included in the participant survey, like in the participant report. So these were some of those additional pieces, more nuanced information, and that varied by size of organization naturally, right? Like when you're early stage, that's like will be a large percentage, one third, one fourth, I don't remember. And then over time it comes down. But that was not publicly shared as a way, but that was done. And hopefully when we do this again, I'll upfront get the permission to share it publicly, and then it just becomes a cycle, right? It just becomes muscle.
And then Swati has asked, is there a specific percentage difference between a technical role and support function role?
I don't understand the question, Swati.
Yeah. Swati, would you like to unmute and maybe explain?
Yes. So we recently conducted a compensation benchmarking survey,
Yeah.
and in that we have just got designation-wise compensations. But being an NGO, we require a percentage difference between two roles. So suppose there's a program role and then there is a support function role. Is there any standard percentage that is available that, okay, a technical role will be paid 75 percentile or a support function will be paid at the 50th percentile? Is there something that is there already, or do we have to derive it as an organization?
I still don't think I fully appreciate the question, but let me try to share back. I think in
Can
terms
I
of what's
add
in the
something
report.
to that, if you don't mind, Swati?
Yeah, go ahead.
Question. Yeah, so Girish, we have a similar situation. So when you use the word technical, for example, the organization that I work with, we work with children with learning disability.
Yeah.
So 90% of the staff that we hire at different levels are people who we say psychologist minimum, who will actually be providing that intervention. So that is what we refer to as the technical staff.
Technical.
Right?
Mm.
And then you have an HR person and you have a communications person
Support.
and a finance.
Right.
That would be the non-technical. So I think her
Yeah.
question is, should there be a salary difference? Because people, if they're non-technical people on the board, they'll feel, but no, you need everybody to run the organization. But I think her question really is that, should technical people, which is 90% driving the main objective of the organization, have a differential in salary? Is that how you're wanting to understand the question, Swati?
That's right. Almost, yes. I'm
Okay.
trying to
So
ask.
let me then bring up one page, right? Like that might help. So this is all the going through the document too. This is the support teams. And I'll use it in a second. But overall, Swati and Swapna, to your question, I actually think it will. So two things. One, there is a natural market rate, if I may, like for a certain set of qualifications, and there is for a certain set of experiences, there is a certain choice of salary that folks will have. They could choose to be in the development sector. They could choose to. So if I take a psychologist, for example, they could choose to work associated with a hospital as a freelancer or with your organization, right? So, and for each of these, there will be a certain amount that they can get. And who we are able to attract will be those who are comfortable with that particular range that we're able to offer. Certain organizations go for folks who are comfortable with lower salaries but are heavily purpose driven. They are the ones that they attract. Certain others say, no, I want to focus on excellence and market parity, and they might have larger sources of funding. So strategies differ. Why I share this is to say we did not look at specialized roles like teacher, psychologist, nurse, etc., because they do not fall under the same common set of same management or these support functions. Because their market dynamics, I really don't like that word, but like the salaries that they will be able to get are different. Might be lower, might be higher, depending on the context and location. So why I brought this up is you can also see a very interesting sort of trend, which shows that there is difference even between, let's say, the different support functions. You can't even clump all of them in one, as I'm sure all of us know, but I think the graphs also started to show it. For example, in organizations that have lower budgets, you will find that they don't have these support functions, as we know. It is not the right use of funds, and you don't have separate functions, usually one person to run the whole thing. one admin person. As it grew, first you start hiring folks. There'll be a finance person. Again, the finance associate not really paid all that much. Maybe is also admin plus finance. Over time, you will find that a finance manager or a fundraising manager becomes more and more valuable, right? And even then, there is a rough difference that you will find. Over time, it stabilizes, but the way that the evolution happens, what is valued at different stages, there was a little bit of play that we were able to see. Long story short, the support functions, the program functions, and specialist roles all look different. There are differences even between each of these. Third, a lot of this depends on your organization strategy. And fourth, in terms of percentage of your total funding budget that you allocate, that is usually, at least in my experience, it is partly driven by your program needs or your organization needs, and on the other side, on compliance. Most of us, I think, work with restricted funds. You give a proposal and you need that proposal to have a certain percentage of this as admin budget, and the remaining has to be program. Second, if you're receiving foreign funds, you've got the larger 20% receipt problem where only up to 20% of your admin of your costs can be admin costs, etc. So all of these are the sort of constraints we work with, and so I don't want to simplify to a simple number, but these are considerations that I think are there. So Ati, Swapna, is that helpful in some general form?
Yeah, I think so. A little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'm really conscious I'm not able to wave that magic wand and give an answer. Yeah. Malati?
Thanks for the insights, Girish. So, quick question. I see these tabs on top, like geography, years of operations, right? So, in my view, this will also have a kind of this benchmarking will also probably have nuances which is across geography, across the years of operation, and also the staff strength that they have, right? Staff strength again will also be a function of the years of operation, number of years the organization has been in this. So can you just give us some insights that this average that you have mentioned, how does it cover these two aspects? So you are looking at one aspect, which is the fund, overall fund, right?
Yeah.
That interspread with geography and number of years. Is there some way? I know it is a very complex thing, but if we were to analyze and understand where we figure which bucket do we fall in, then we have to look at, okay, I'm looking at a budget of maybe say 2 crores, 10 years of operation in a rural geography with a staff strength of 50, so that is what I was just thinking that, is there some way we could sort of place ourselves in that correct comparative bucket?
Yeah. So few things. One, there were additional cuts that were done. So one cut that we made public, which seemed to be the most useful, was the budget cut. And that was the most useful information that was most widely applicable, hence the choice of making that public. The additional things that are not included right now, but were also less relevant, I would say, like they go into greater nuance and less clarity, were by geography, which is, do you work only in urban areas, only in rural areas, both sort of thing, or tribal areas separately, and years of operation. So there was a table there. And there were also some additional case studies of organizations that had also filled it, but did not fit the mold. For example, there was a tech organization, and tech salaries are significantly different from the program salaries that were there. So we just put that as a case study. And separately, there was a social enterprise that also filled it. They are not a non-profit. Again, they have a different salary structure. So these were put as case studies. And we should go to the benefits because they are also useful and important. Something that I actually personally feel is undervalued in the report. So we'll go to that. But this was the additional information that was also available, which is not been made public. That said, Malti, I think the struggle I had was also what is the useful data to take out of it. Saying I work in Chengalpattu outside Chennai somebody can mark that as I work in semi-urban or rural. Right? If you're an organization that brings, underprivileged girls to teach them basketball in boarding schools in the city, then you will mark urban and rural. And so that information starts getting murky or hard to say that they are a comparison organization. Right. So like I said in the beginning, this is useful to get a quick sense, directional idea of whether you're completely off range or whether you're largely doing okay. Uh, but if it comes to something specific, whether it is a specialist piece, whether it is the piece around I want to look at similar orgs, that is where the actual compensation benchmarking that organizations generally do come in handy, where they look at specific comparable organizations, right? So they look at who else are the people that either I take talent from or give talent to, essentially, and then try to be like, okay, so these are the sort of folks that I need to compare with, and then you reach out and you build that out. That usually a consultant ends up doing. So this one was trying to be like we all have the information, let's do it together. So I don't have that cut available in the public report, but I do still find that one thing that you said was not necessarily true, which is that the number of people in your organization is proportional to the years of operation. They were different because there are choices, right? So if you are someone like again, Simran, sorry, since I saw you on call, like Teach for India, your employee size actually goes in the thousands suddenly very differently. Or like a Kaivalya, which also has a lot of folks with the Gandhi Fellowship also that they are supporting with salaries, versus you have someone who has very limited footprint in terms of employees, even though they might be 20 years in as an organization.
Sure, Girish. Thank you so much for that. A quick question: this average that you have mentioned, the salaries packages, right, for the various functional designations, is this a all-inclusive kind of thing with the benefits that you have mentioned, which is, the social security benefits plus gratuity plus etc. etc. Is
so that again, one in general, I think the ISDM report found that there is no variable element there. There is no like what is the performance bonus is not typically seen as one thing that the ISDM report I remember seeing in. Second, to answer your question, this was asked again very simply as what is the salary that you provide? There are differences across, and so you can take this as the CTC in terms of broad idea. Again, this is about accuracy, not precision. I would bet that this information is accurate. I will not say that this is precise. So for example, that 12 might be 12 and a half, or it might be 13, or it could be 11 and a half, but it will not be a 30 for this set of organizations, right? And it was a call that we took because the risk that we ran otherwise, if we complicate it too much, is because you can't then compare. Different people think about things differently, and we'll have to get into qualitative interviews also to make sure we understand it. As it stood, it required significant follow-up to get information. And sometimes there's also the risk that nobody will fill the survey, right? That was the starting risk. In year one, the fact that 60 organizations filled it was phenomenal. And in year two, 100 organizations have filled it. So the goal now for upcoming one should be 250. But that's where we are. But yeah, let me pause there.
Yeah.
Vaishali, yeah. Yeah, Madhu, please go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, so Vaishali, I was just checking if there was any other questions that needed to be taken, else I wanted to move on.
Sure. I'll just pose the question and then maybe we can also come back to it because I think you're going to cover. So Swapna has asked to throw some light on wellness and other benefits. I think it's getting covered.
Perfect. Yes.
And also Sajal had one question about are there any parameters to fix the salary of staff of the NGOs? So I think that also might get covered. So yeah, you can go ahead.
Understood. Sounds good. I think, are there parameters to fix? I think the conversation that we were having earlier in the discussion, which was around there are multiple factors. I've seen many different organizations, many different starting points. And those who are lucky are in a place where they can choose to figure out what percentage increment do we want to give this year because we are, underutilizing our budgets. Uh, yeah, but that's usually not always the case. I do want to take you to the second part of this piece, which is the benefits. Again, the survey that was asked kept it simple. Do you provide benefits, yes or no? And tell us a little bit more around what you provide. Based on that, yes, yes to some and no. And based on that, it was reading through all of this information. This was during a world where ChatGPT was not there. So I was reading all of that was provided to kind of make sense of what the data says. So what this has, and I'll take you to the relatively interesting parts of it. Overall, asked about leaves. Leaves are very hard to benchmark, and there's been a request to do a separate leave-related benchmarking from some of my HR colleagues, which we may do in the coming time, because different types of leaves require to be looked at in totality. PF and gratuity, like we all know from, there are organizations that do it as usually the 1800 minimum is what they do because that is what is possible. And there were other interesting things like wellness allowance, which was there, right? And performance bonus, like we saw, was minimum. So after this, I will not be going through the detail, but what you have is for each of these, you've got deep dive pages which talk about the big picture. What is the typical leave structure? How do they think about carry forward of leaves, and how do they think about leave encashment? What are the different types of interesting leaves which are there? There were a few interesting leaves that were atypical, were not statistically there, but were useful to call out. And all of this is for inspiration, saying, do I want to include this in my context, in my organization? What I found was, there was a miscarriage leave of 1 to 2 weeks that was there. There were wedding leaves that were plugged in by multiple organizations. There was even an adoption leave that was there for one organization. So for me, it was just very interesting to see that these are also things that organizations are consciously putting into their policies. PF, as we shared, largely 1800. Gratuity, ESI, wellness benefits, and this is worth spending a minute on. There are many different ways that organizations are looking at wellness benefits. One track of ideas was around providing mental health support. So, which is free mental health well-being sessions, or having financial assistance for therapies that they do independently up to 10,000, or 1,500 per month for self-healing activities. You can choose the activity that you want. Second option, other than financial support, is providing tied up services. Like I partner with a provider and you can take free medical consultation and annual health checkups. And the third one was providing, general allowances. As you can see, depending on the situation, there was one fully virtual organization that provided a setup allowance of 5,000 per year. Someone had set a milestone-based reward saying, if you work 5 years in the organization, you get a 10,000 rupees plus 12 extra days of leave as a kicker for staying on with us and to show that we value you. There was a health and learning incentive, which I thought was interesting, like sign up for the courses you want or take care of your health for 32,000 per year. So many different organizations, many different sizes, but inspiration can be taken from any of them. And from the performance bonus perspective, as we know, there were some who said we give one-time bonuses. Some folks give increment. What was useful, what may be useful for many of you is that we also asked them, saying, what is the increments that are planned for this year? That was in this year that we have. Broadly, it ranged around 7% to 12%. That was the most common number that was there. But just like the salaries, that number is also to be seen as a range. Usually, they have a performance variation. So somebody, for example, said, we do 5% to 10% depending on the employer, or 5% to 20% for high performers on one side and low performers on the other. And for many of them, it was like we do 6% or like whatever, 10%, and then we do plus minus depending on how your performance is. And of course, given that the leadership salaries are higher base, many organizations said our field staff get a higher percentage versus our management team, which gets a lower percentage hike. So there were all these different aspects that came up. Just wanted to play that back to you. Beyond this, there were also other benefits. Have shared the overview here. The details are there in the participant report. There was financial support, interest-free loans, one-time support at milestones, etc. Travel, relocation, communication budgets that were provided. There was one around how approaches to how they support the work week and strengthen culture, like budget for team lunch sort of thing. And finally, L&D support that I'd already mentioned, also called out separately, saying they have, for books and for event visits, they provide support. This is the big picture around the benefits that is there. And this is the remaining pages that I mentioned. So let me pause here. This was a little bit of a walkthrough on the benefit side. Of course, again, please go through it in terms of the detail and what would be useful for you in your context as you're updating your policies. This is like the second point of pause, and then we go to the final part. Thanks, Dr. Nilesh. That is something that, that is something that I do want to touch upon. There is another report that will be helpful for you in terms of attracting and retaining talent. So there's another question saying, of the 100 NGOs, how many were international NGOs? The benchmark seems quite high. To answer your question, the list of NGOs is right up there, and that's a good 80% of them. So you'll get a picture of them. Most of them are not international NGOs, just to be clear, if you look at the list very quickly. And let's, again, even when we say NGOs, right, there is a whole range. Are you based in cities? Are you system, working at a system level? Are you grassroots? And each of them has a different sort of org profile, right? So which is why the explicit permission to also share their name so that you can see whether the benchmark is actually relevant for you. So if you look at the Million Missions report, it takes a very different lens and a very different sort of approach. So the sort of nonprofits that they work with will be much more grassroots, was my sense when I looked at the report. That might be a more useful report to look at in case your salaries are just not matching here. And again, all of these are now, like, this report is information as of November, December last year. So we're a year into it. I wasn't sure whether we need to do one right now or we give it one more year before we do it. But that's kind of the call. And we really want to do it every year, because one of the risks of doing benchmarking is that everyone keeps correcting, right? And which is why, like, 40% of my time on this call is just putting caveats and limitations and putting brakes on your thinking, because you have to use the information in any benchmarking very carefully, because that should not turn into your reality, right? And it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle where everyone keeps increasing according to the benchmark. And then you end up with a very bloated sort of benchmark, which may look very different from what is required. At the same time, there is the reality that our sector's overall salaries look very different from the corporate sector's salaries also. So Shreya, to your question, I don't actually have a sense of the answer. I assume S4D is sports for development. Yeah. No, I don't actually know, don't have like a number off the top of my head. I know a few of them. So if you can just write into that email ID, I can also at least share back the names, but I'm sure you know if you work in that space already. Let me pause. Any additional thoughts, any reflections? You can either put it on chat or you can share, and then we can go to the last part, a little bit also answering one of the questions that came in, Dr. Nilesh's question that came in. Dipali, Nikita, Alvira, Meher, Ashish.
Girish, this was super helpful. Just wanted to check something, like maybe we've already covered this bit, but I think I lost you for a minute there. On page number 25, I'm actually just looking at the leadership program teams and what is the budget category for each level. I am thinking about how I can use this information within my org also, and looking at how tenured and early tenure managers are the levels in the graph that you've shared. At TFI, we have managers and senior managers. Do you think I can use the information for tenured managers as senior manager, or that would not be correct?
Help me, I didn't actually understand the core of the question here. So let me play back and tell me if I've understood correctly. You're saying that TFI has a multi-layered structure. Your
Yes.
question is, what do I connect the tenured manager role to?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that? I would actually say you're thinking about it the right way. Usually, I think what we've seen is that the CEO salary is your like topmost one, as you can see from this graph.
Right.
And then you work downwards from there, right? So you can count the number of layers you have and do a rough mapping to this. I think it should work.
Right.
Right.
Like, so actually what I'm also trying to understand, and why my question was around tenure earlier, is because I think we have a few layers around manager levels. So there's a manager, there is a coach, and then there's a senior manager. We also have an associate and an assistant level. I am trying to understand how can I map these. The CEO and CXO is very clear for me. I am thinking maybe a tenured manager could be a senior manager because this is someone who's more experienced in their role, or in general has more experience. Whereas early tenure manager, like according to the levels that we have, this should be a coach, but then that pushes the manager level to the tenured associate space.
Understood.
So I'm just trying to understand.
Kind of got it. So my strong recommendation to you would be take this table, the table that is there, add your salary levels to it, right? And you will get a sense of what to do. Sometimes you will say both of these relate to this one, and these two relate to that one, right? So the thing is, every organization deals with its layering and its names very differently. Hence, and in the next round, we also will include saying, what do you call this layer? Right? So that you will also have that. We don't have that this time. That was a miss. That was a learning. So we will add that in next time. But for now, I would just say put it and you'll get a sense of how to connect it.
Right. No, I think that would be helpful. Thank you for the insight. I'll try that.
Yeah. Anything else? Anything on chat that we should look at? Shreya's question on chat, would love for others to lean in. There are so many experienced HR professionals here. I really don't think I'd be the right person to share on this. So what are the different salary components? If someone could just share back to her on chat, that'd be great. So what I wanted to do is share two things that came up in terms of reflections when I was looking at it. One was, and this is like one of those things that you can't really do much about right now, but it's just very interesting to see and useful for us to reflect on. One is that if you just look at the trends, right, as the size of the organization increases, so this is the flipped view that is also provided in the report. That is, again, the bar graph, but in the horizontal, you have the roles, and the colored graphs are the budget sizes. So you can see the improve or shift in the salary levels for the same role by size of organization's budget. What's very interesting for me was just seeing that if I look at the CEO salary of, let's say, somebody who is in a 50 lakh NGO versus a 50 crore NGO, it just increases like anything, right? It increases like this. And at the same time, if I look at the associate salaries, across organizations, the associate salaries roughly look the same. It doesn't really change. Now, I know that it is really important that leadership salaries, you do need to attract talent, you need the right sort of talent. But also it just made me reflect saying, how do we make sure that as a sector, we are also able to provide enough for 80-90% of the folks in our organizations and apportion our salary in a way that we will be able to support them and sustain their careers. Like I said, There's no immediate actionable on this one, but I just felt like to a group of HR professionals and org leaders on this call, it's an important one to share back for us to reflect on and maybe start including into our thinking as we decide how we want to split our budgets. And finally, to the question Dr. Nilesh asked, so there are two other benchmarkings that were done, right? So one was done in February on the right side, which was what is the travel policy? This became a repeated question that kept getting asked in the HR for NGOs group. So we just did a quick benchmarking saying how much do you pay per liter for bike, car, etc. Do you pay for electric vehicles? What is the per diem for tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities? You've all heard this question. You've all asked this question. We put a public report out there that you can access. And more recently, just a couple of months ago, there was another report that was done, which was on the onboarding benchmarking. The question became, this is not a quantitative benchmark. The question is to say that, look, you've hired people, you do recruitment, and you've got people in. Your first experience with the organization matters a lot. And different people are able to do it very differently. So there were very interesting practices to learn from at 3 levels. One, from a pre-joining onboarding, like before the person joins, what all do you do? Second is that first 1 week or 1 day or 2 days of induction. We also have benchmarking of how many days people typically do induction and how they do it and what they give, what is a welcome kit. And finally, the orientation, the longer 1-2 months journey of making the person fully integrated into the organization. So this is all there. It's a very long detailed report, which again, very similar to this one, but could be useful. I just wanted to give you some of the advice that came out from organizations, right? There were 3 things that came out. One is make it a warm and structured process before they join, right? Make sure that you communicate to them and remember that they have no idea about your organization. Send things before they join. And when they join, make sure that everyone mandatorily has an introduction, no matter what your program needs are, or the fact that they really need that person to start working. So make sure you do the process and don't forget it. Second thing is make sure that it is a warm welcome that is given to people. That feeling that they have when they have a buddy. One of the biggest recommendations was having a buddy system in the organization. And the third thing was a standard problem everyone faces is you have too much content you want to cover. How do you do that in an engaging and effective way? And how do you decide how much is too much and pace it properly? And one of the things that seem to matter quite a bit is making sure that the leadership team also turns up. Some folks have them as mentors. Some folks make sure they come for the induction and do a session to just orient them to the idea. But all of this is like one quick page that I brought out from the exec summary. But there's lots of reflections like this that you can find in that report. And this was to Dr. Nilesh's point, one lens to take around attracting and retaining talent. And you can extrapolate a lot of the learnings from there into what needs to happen in the regular professional development and support. So the benefits section of this report, as well as the overall onboarding report, I think will be useful towards attracting, retaining talent. So that's it. And beyond that, of course, there is the podcast itself where I try to put out some of these pieces in a way that it's simplified, including the benchmarking piece, recordings of conversations that we've had, etc. That's it from my end. Before the bubble breaks and you step out from this room, what would be very helpful is if you could take a minute to put down one takeaway from this session onto the chat. Of course, if you have questions, feel free to also voice them. But I wanted to make sure that all of us, there are about 40 of us, 43 of us left on the call, would be great if you could share one takeaway that you have on the chat. और अगर इस पूरे सेशन में कोई था जिनको भाषा के कारण समझ में कमी थी, तो बस बताइएगा DM पे या मैसेज पे, और इसका एक सार मैं वापस से दोहरा सकता हूँ. Thank you, Soumya. And yes, Vaishali has also shared a feedback form on the chat. Before you all leave, it'll be great if you could just click on that link and share the feedback.
And of course, please feel free to unmute and ask questions. And thank you so much, Girish. I do think that this was very, very insightful. I just want to share with everyone that at Atma, we were also one of the participating organizations. So we do have, we were able to use the full report, and the leadership team did use it to, revise the salaries and do the benchmarking exercise internally. So, yeah.
Hey.
I think Dr. Nilesh has one question. Do you know any resources or tools that NGOs can leverage to support their compensation and benefits decisions? I think some reports are already linked at the last page of this report, Nilesh ji. But Girish or anyone else from the audience as well, this is a space where we help each other. So yeah. Thanks, Gayatri. Thanks, Sayukta. And Swapna for sharing.
Let me just share the link to
The report again.
Yeah.
Anojit, the reports link is shared already. You can see that. And also, for the full report, I guess let's all participate in more. I think it's great that we have this kind of a process because otherwise it's quite removed, right? Like we don't know how reports are made, who is it made with, and when it will come out, right? So, yeah. I will also share the latest report. Of course, it's there in the resources, but the one on onboarding practices, right? I think that's also a very interesting one. And yeah, lots of comments coming in, Girish. I hope you're reading the chat. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Let me very quickly just plug the one on the onboarding practices as well onto the chat so you guys have it. Oops, sorry, I'll have to fix that. The hedge is.
Do fill out the feedback form. It really helps us. And if there are any other unanswered questions that you get later, right, and you want to ask Girish, please feel free to share that. I will take it to Girish, and hopefully, whenever he has time, he will answer it. And if you have any more suggestions on what we should do next, at what topics, who would you like to listen to, or if there is something that you would like to share with others, right? Please feel free to share those suggestions. We really do believe in community work. So, yeah. And once again, thank you so much, Girish.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Vaishali. I really appreciate the space. And thank you, everyone, for listening, engaging, and asking so many questions. Sorry if some of those questions were very hard for me to answer.